My name is Michael Walsh. I'm 34 years old, and 3 weeks ago, my entire family buried my grandfather without so much as a call to me. No funeral invitation, no obituary mention, not even a group text. They acted like I was dead, too. And maybe a part of me was. Until today. Because today, at exactly 1:42 p.m., I got a message that made me stop breathing for 3 full seconds. Mr. Michael Walsh, your presence is required for the reading of Robert Walsh's last will and testament. 2:00 p.m. Benton and Associates. Urgent. Now, I know what you're thinking. Why the hell would I be invited to a will reading when I'd been erased from the family? Yeah, I wondered the same thing. But this was no mistake. Because what was waiting inside that law office wasn't just a will, it was a reckoning. And before I tell you how a leather-bound briefcase, a forgotten pocket watch, and one dusty old video shattered everything my family thought they owned, let me ask you this. Have you ever been cast out by the very people who raised you, just for telling the truth? If so, you're going to want to stick around. Go ahead and hit that like button if you believe truth matters more than blood. Drop a comment telling me where you're watching from. I see you out there, and yeah, subscribe, because this is just the beginning. Let's rewind. It all started 6 months ago, Thanksgiving, but not the warm kind with burnt pie and hugs from your weird aunt. No, this was the kind where you realize the turkey isn't the only thing getting carved up. Thanksgiving Day, at the Walsh family lake house in Vermont, looked like a damn magazine cover. Polished silverware, fine china that only saw daylight once a year, perfectly creased linen napkins folded like origami birds. From the outside, we were the American dream. Old money, old manners, old family name. Inside it was rot disguised as tradition. The guest list was carefully curated. Every seat at that long oak table served a political purpose, someone to impress, someone to manipulate, someone to remind us we were important. I hadn't been back in 3 years. Not since I'd stopped playing their game. But this year, I came, for one reason only, my daughter. Lily. She was 6 years old, bright, loud, unfiltered. She loved the lake, the cousins she barely knew, and the idea of a big family dinner. I figured I could take 3 days of pretending for her. God, was I wrong? The moment I walked in, I felt it, that familiar shrink-wrap sensation, like my skin was too tight and the air too clean. My mother, Eleanor, met me at the door with a smile that was 2 degrees colder than polite. Oh, Michael, I wasn't sure you'd actually show. She looked past me immediately, scooping Lily into her arms like I was just the delivery man. Inside, my father Richard held court by the stone fireplace, bourbon in hand, voice booming with unearned confidence. Thomas and Peter, my younger brothers, were already half a glass deep and laughing like nothing ever touched them. Then came the dinner. I was seated at the far end of the table, like an inconvenient +1. Lily sat beside me, her little blue dress too bright for the room, her eyes wide, soaking in every signal. It started small, comments cloaked as concern. Lily's a little energetic. Isn't she, Michael? You still doing that woodworking thing? It's nice to have a hands-on job. I gritted my teeth, bit my tongue, smiled for my daughter. Then Richard started bragging about doubling the Johnsons' retirement fund. They're finally buying that condo in Florida. He beamed. I blinked. The Johnsons were our former neighbors. I'd seen Mrs. Johnson just the week before, gray-faced and counting coins at the grocery store. I set my fork down. The sound echoed like a gunshot across the table. That's not true, I said quietly. Everyone froze. Excuse me, Richard's tone sharpened. They didn't double anything. Mark Johnson told me they're barely keeping the lights on. They took out a reverse mortgage just to stay afloat. The silence became a pressure cooker. "You don't know what the hell you're talking about," he snapped. "You're a carpenter. Michael, you build chairs, I build futures. Stay in your lane." My chest burned. My hands curled into fists under the table. "You're a predator," I said, my voice steady. "You sell lies to the people who trust you. You stole from the people who raised you." Eleanor gasped like I'd cursed in church. "Michael, enough. You're upsetting everyone." But I wasn't done. I turned to her. "How's that youth center fundraiser? Mom still can't find where that $30,000 went." She went pale, her mouth opened, but no sound came. Thomas stood up, puffed out his chest. "You're just jealous." I laughed hard, ugly. "Oh, let's talk about the $12,000 in online poker charges from Grandpa's card. You think an 82-year-old suddenly got addicted to blackjack?" Peter tried to melt into his chair. I caught him anyway. "And I know what you're growing in Grandpa's garage. The sweet smell. Not fertilizer. Genius." It was an execution, one bullet at a time. I looked around at their faces red, trembling, stunned. Then I looked at Grandpa. He wasn't angry. He wasn't even surprised. He was devastated. The man who used to bring me to his workshop and teach me how to sand oak without splinters now sat still. Hands clenched, mouth tight, eyes glassy. I thought I'd lost him that day. I thought I'd burned the last bridge. What I didn't know was that somewhere between that Thanksgiving dinner and his final breath, Grandpa had started making plans. Plans they never saw coming. "You weren't supposed to be at the will reading," Thomas would hiss later. But I was, because Grandpa made damn sure of it. Before I walk you into that law office, before I tell you what happened when the doors closed and the briefcase snapped open, you need to know what came before. Who I really am. Who they really are. Because a will doesn't just divide wealth, it draws battle lines. And this battle started decades ago. I grew up in a house where everything had a label. The good china was for real guests. The living room was off limits unless the pastor visits. And love was conditional. My father, Richard, was a numbers man. Clean suits, clean lies. He built his reputation on a smile that never quite reached his eyes. He talked about legacy the way politicians talk about war, like something noble, but always for someone else to pay. My mother, Eleanor, was softer on the surface. She ran charity events like military campaigns, always in heels, always with a clipboard, always saying things like, "Let's help the community," in a way that reflects well on us. Then there were my brothers. Thomas, the eldest after me, was the golden boy. Prep school, business degree, Rolex at graduation. He worked for a hedge fund in Chicago that somehow managed to lose clients' money while making him richer every quarter. Peter, the youngest, was more subtle. He played dumb well, but he was smart enough to keep his side hustle growing in Grandpa's garage, literally. I was the one who never fit. I didn't want the money. I didn't want the games. I wanted something real. So I picked up Grandpa's old tools the year I turned 12 and never looked back. Grandpa Robert was the only one who saw me. He'd been a carpenter before he joined the army, after the war. He built his own cabin by the lake, and he taught me that wood tells the truth, even when people don't. You can't fake a straight line in oak, son. It either fits or it splinters. We spent hours in his shop, sanding, cutting, laughing. He wasn't a man of many words, but when he did speak, it stayed with you. When I left college early to start my woodworking business, he was the only one who didn't call it a mistake. Everyone else, they treated it like a phase. Something I'd grow out of when I realized the real world doesn't pay in dignity. But dignity was all I had left when the family cut me out. The last time I saw Grandpa before Thanksgiving, he gave me something. It wasn't wrapped, no speech, just handed it to me while we stood on the porch watching the lake freeze over. It was an old pocket watch, worn brass, initials RW etched in the back. "She's slow," he said, "but steady, like a good life." At the time, I thought it was just sentimental. Now I know better. That pocket watch would show up again at the end of all this. And it would mean everything. After Thanksgiving exploded, after I stood up at that dinner and tore down the curtain on every smiling face at that table, I didn't hear from anyone. Not a text, not an apology, not even an insult. Just silence. It was like I'd been deleted. And I won't lie, it hurt. Not because I missed them, but because Lily kept asking why we didn't go back. Because deep down, there was still that 12-year-old boy inside me. The one who sanded oak with Grandpa and believed that truth had a place at the table. Then came the call. No, not even a call, just a text. 1:42 p.m. Mr. Michael Walsh, please report to Benton and Associates at 2:00 p.m. Reading of Robert Walsh's final will. Attendance mandatory. I stared at it like it was a prank. But the number checked out. The law firm was real. The message was direct. And for some reason I couldn't explain, I went. The building was this restored Victorian on a hill near Burlington. Red brick, white trim, brass doorknob polished to a mirror shine. Everything about it whispered old money. Kept secrets. I parked in the gravel lot behind it, cut the engine, and sat in silence for a minute. My hands were sweaty, my stomach was tight, and I kept turning the pocket watch over in my palm. Tick, tick, tick. I hadn't wound it in months. But somehow, it was still moving. Inside, the lobby smelled like lemon polish and mahogany. A receptionist in a navy suit looked up, smiled, then did a double take when I gave my name. "You're Michael, yes. Please wait in the Franklin room. You're the last one to arrive." Last, I followed her down a long hallway lined with oil paintings, the kind where the eyes follow you. And then I walked in. They were all there. Richard, Eleanor, Thomas, Peter, even Great Aunt Martha. Silent and stone-faced in her wheelchair, wearing her pearls like armor. Everyone turned when I entered and froze. Thomas actually stood up. "You weren't invited," he snapped. "This is for family." Before I could answer, another door opened behind me. Mr. Benton stepped in, mid-60s, silver hair, tailored gray suit. His voice was calm but sharp. "Actually, Michael was invited, and more than that, this can't begin without him." That's when I noticed it. On the desk, next to a thick envelope, sat a leather briefcase, old, scuffed, locked, and beside it, the pocket watch, mine. No, his, and I realized something. This wasn't a reading. This was a message. From beyond the grave. From the only man in that family who ever told the truth. "Why is his watch here?" my father asked. "Because," Benton said. "He wanted Michael to have it, and everything else." I couldn't breathe, but I could feel it. The air shifting, the blood draining from their faces, and I hadn't even heard the will yet. The room went dead silent. You could almost hear the dust settling on the bookshelves, the weight of the air pressing against the high ceilings. My father's mouth opened, but no sound came out. My mother turned a sickly shade of beige. Peter actually looked like he was about to puke. Mr. Benton adjusted his glasses, completely unfazed by the tension. "Mr. Walsh Robert. That has left very specific instructions," he said, calmly unlocking the leather briefcase. "This is not just a will. This is a statement." He pulled out a thick manila envelope and a small black USB drive, placing them carefully next to the pocket watch. "I'll let Mr. Walsh speak for himself." He clicked the remote. The screen on the far wall lit up, flickered once, and there he was. Grandpa. He was sitting in the old lake house study, surrounded by shelves of war novels and woodworking plans. His hair was thinner than I remembered, but his posture upright. Steady commanded attention. His voice measured, warm, sharp as a chisel. "If you're watching this," he said, "then I'm finally gone, and you've gathered like vultures, sniffing for scraps." A gasp rippled through the room. Eleanor clutched her pearls. Thomas muttered, "What the hell is this?" But Grandpa continued, eyes locked into the camera. "Let's skip the niceties. You all know why you're here, and some of you think you know what you're about to get. But let me be clear. None of you deserve a damn cent." He paused, not dramatically deliberately. "Michael is the only one who's earned anything." I sat motionless, not smug, not victorious, just stunned, hollowed out and filled all at once. He told the truth at Thanksgiving, something the rest of you haven't done in years. The video cut to a time-stamped clip, grainy but clear from the Thanksgiving dinner. Paul's camera, still rolling that night, had caught everything. My voice, their reactions, the fury, the panic. "Thomas," Grandpa's voice narrated over the footage. "I checked the bank statements myself. You stole from me." Cut to Richard, red-faced and barking across the table. "Richard, you've built a castle out of sand and lies. How many retirees did you bury in debt so you could buy your third boat?" Now Eleanor's voice, hissing about disrespect. "And Eleanor, you used church money to fund cocktail parties. If I believed in hell, I'd say you've reserved a nice seat." It was brutal, surgical, and every word of it was true. When the footage cut back to Grandpa, he looked tired, not weak, just done pretending. This family forgot its roots, forgot what matters. You wanted inheritance, you already inherited your greed. Then he turned his head slightly, looked right at the lens. "Michael, if you're in the room, I'm proud of you, son." My throat tightened. "You chose work over status, integrity over comfort. You got nothing from this family, but gave everything to your daughter. That's what a man does." He held up the pocket watch in his hand, my pocket watch. "Remember when we fixed this? Took us 4 hours to find the broken spring. You didn't quit. You figured it out." He held it toward the camera like an oath. "That's why you're getting everything. The house, the accounts, the business shares, even the land." You could feel the room explode without a sound. My brothers went rigid. My mother's hand flew to her mouth. My father stood up like he might lunge. But the video wasn't over. "If anyone contests this will," Grandpa added, now firm, "they'll trigger the truth clause, which means every single piece of evidence I've collected over the last 3 years. Financial records. Audio. Statements gets turned over to the authorities and the press." He smiled faintly. "So, think very carefully before calling your lawyers." The screen went black. Silence. For a full 5 seconds. No one moved. Even the fluorescent lights above seemed to hold their breath. Then Thomas shoved his chair back with a screech. "This is insane. That old man was manipulated. Michael, you poisoned him against us." He lunged forward, but Benton stood fast. "Sit down. This was verified under video authentication and witnessed legally. There is no loophole." Richard stared at me like I'd stabbed him. "You think this makes you better than us?" he said, low and cold. I stood, not to challenge, not to gloat, just to breathe. "No," I said, "I think this means I don't have to be you." Peter tried to say something, but it came out as a cough. Aunt Martha, from her wheelchair, let out a dry chuckle. "About damn time," she muttered. The moment snapped. My heart was racing, but I felt lighter. Not vindicated, not triumphant, just free. I looked at the watch on the table. Picked it up. It was warm, still ticking. Tick, tick, tick. This isn't over, Thomas growled. He was wrong. For them, it was just beginning. Because what Grandpa left me wasn't just money or land. It was a challenge, and I knew exactly what I had to do with it. The strange thing about getting everything you ever wanted is realizing you didn't want it for the reasons you thought. After the will reading, I didn't leave the law office smiling. I didn't high-five the receptionist or pump my fist in the parking lot. I sat in my truck, hands on the wheel, that pocket watch ticking in my chest pocket. And I stared at the steering wheel like it might give me directions for what to do next. Because now, I had it all. The lake house, the trust, the land. Even shares in Walsh & Sons Capital, though I didn't want those anywhere near me. But Grandpa didn't just hand me a fortune. He handed me a grenade. And the pin was already halfway out. That night, I went back to my cabin in Asheville. The air was damp. The woodshop smelled like cedar and varnish. And Lily was asleep on the couch with one of my flannels as a blanket. I stood there in the doorway for a long time, just looking at her. 6 years old, bright, unfiltered, brave in ways even I wasn't. She stirred a little and mumbled, "Did we win?" My throat tightened. "We didn't win, baby," I whispered. "But we didn't lose." She smiled in her sleep. And that was the moment I decided I wasn't going to spend my inheritance on beachfront condos or revenge schemes. I was going to do what Grandpa would have done. Use wood, use hands, build something that would outlive all of us. The next morning, I opened Grandpa's last personal journal. Benton had slipped it to me at the end of the meeting, saying, "He wanted you to have this too. Said you'd know what to do with it." Inside were pages of hand-drawn diagrams, simple benches, rocking chairs, toy chests and names, dozens of names. Kids, from his church, from the community, from the foster center down the road. Next to each name, notes in shaky handwriting. Smart with tools, no father at home, needs something real to believe in. Grandpa had been planning something. A youth apprenticeship program, woodworking for kids with nowhere to go after school, a place to create with their hands instead of destroy with them. He called it Walsh Legacy Hands. I stared at the cover page for a long time, then ran my fingers across the words. The ink was faded, but the meaning hit like thunder. He didn't just leave me the shop, I whispered. He left me a blueprint. Now, here's the twist. To fund this dream, I had to face the exact monster he warned me about. Walsh & Sons Capital. I now legally owned 51% of the company. It was part of the inheritance, a poison pill disguised as power. But that also meant I could walk into the building and dismantle it from the inside. So I did. 3 days later, I stepped into the marble lobby of Walsh & Sons like I was made of steel. The receptionist looked up with a puzzled smile. "Can I help you?" "Tell Thomas and Richard Walsh their majority shareholder is here to review the books." Her fingers froze mid-keystroke. 20 minutes later, I stood in the executive boardroom, flanked by attorneys from Benton's firm, because I brought backup. Richard sat at the head of the table, arms crossed like he hadn't lost. Thomas paced, red-faced, trying to mask his panic behind numbers and jargon. "You don't know how this works." "Michael," he hissed. "You're a carpenter." "Wrong," I said. "I'm your boss." Then I dropped the real bomb. Effective immediately. All operations at Walsh & Sons are frozen, pending a full forensic audit. Cue meltdown. You can't do that. The hell I can't. Read the paperwork. Grandpa built safeguards. You just never thought you'd see the day they'd be used. Peter wasn't even in the building. Word was, he'd disappeared. probably hoping the garage grow-op wouldn't make headlines now that his name was on Grandpa's video. I didn't care. The audit would uncover everything. And once it did, I'd pull the plug. Not to destroy them, to starve the rot. With legal teams handling the firm, I turned my attention to the lake house. It was more than a home. It was a symbol. Grandpa had left it exactly how I remembered rough-hewn beams, stone fireplace. Even the rocking chair I helped him build still sat on the porch. But the place needed life. So I started making calls. I contacted the local high school, the community center, the church Grandpa once donated to. Within a month, we had a dozen teenagers, some quiet, some angry, some lost, coming by twice a week to learn how to use a table saw, how to sand joints, how to measure twice and cut once. No lectures, no sermons, just wood, glue, nails, and time. And the crazy thing, it worked. One of the kids, Marquis, 16, foster home to foster home since age 7, built a footstool that nearly brought him to tears. I didn't know I could make something that didn't fall apart, he said. I did. Because for most of my life, I'd felt the same way. The last piece came from Paul. Remember him? The brother-in-law with the camera at Thanksgiving. He showed up at the shop one night with a box of tapes. Grandpa asked me to hold on to these. Said they were for you. But only if the family melted down like he expected. Inside, dozens of mini DV tapes, footage of Grandpa talking, working, teaching. He'd documented everything, his thoughts, his fears, his plans. I digitized it all. One clip hit me hardest. He was looking into the lens, older, slower, but eyes still burning. Legacy isn't about what you leave behind. It's about what people do because you were here. I watched that clip 5 times. Then I built a sign, Walsh Legacy Hands, and hung it outside the shop. But before you think this story ends here, think again. Because 1 week after the audit began, 1 week after I tried to start clean, I got a letter. No name, no return address. Inside, a single sentence handwritten in black ink. He didn't tell you everything. That envelope, no return address, no stamp, just slid under the door of the shop like a secret someone didn't want to carry anymore. Inside, 1 sentence, handwritten in neat black ink. He didn't tell you everything. 7 words, that's all. But they landed like a wrecking ball. I stared at them for a solid minute. My palms went clammy. The room around me faded saws, clamps. The scent of sawdust and linseed oil, it all blurred into background static. Because for the first time since the reading of the will, I doubted him. Grandpa? The man who saved me. Who saw through the family lies. Who handed me his legacy. His land. His what? And now, apparently, a secret. I flipped the letter over, blank. No signature, no clue. At first, I told myself it was just a prank, a bitter cousin. Someone pissed off they didn't get a beach house or trust fund. Hell, maybe even Thomas trying to play mind games. But deep down, I knew it wasn't that. This wasn't rage. This was regret. Someone knew something, and they didn't want it in their hands anymore. That night, I couldn't sleep. I lay on the couch, staring at the ceiling fan spin slow circles in the dark. Lily slept upstairs, and the old clock ticked in the hallway like a drumbeat in my ears. My mind kept circling that sentence. He didn't tell you everything. Not just vague, intentional. That wasn't a jab. It was a breadcrumb. But a breadcrumb to what? The next morning, I went back through the tapes. Paul's box, Grandpa's video diaries. I digitized most of them, but hadn't watched all. Some were labeled, others not. A few just had dates. I pulled one marked May 18th, shop private. Clicked play. Grandpa sat alone at the workbench. The light was dimmer than usual. His hands fidgeted with a piece of walnut he wasn't carving. just holding. He looked straight at the camera. Michael, if you're watching this, then it means I left the rest out. And I owe you more than the truth. I owe you all of it. My chest went tight. There's something I never said. Not because I didn't trust you, but because I didn't want to load you with my sins. He inhaled, deep and shaky. The business, the one I started before the war, wasn't clean. I thought I could build something good out of bad money. Your father didn't become a predator out of nowhere. He watched me. I froze. I laundered for contractors back in the 60s. Real estate deals tied to folks I shouldn't have touched. I got out before it got too deep, and I buried it all, including the records. He looked down, ashamed. I spent the second half of my life trying to undo the first. Then his gaze rose again. In the basement, under the floorboards near the furnace, there's a lockbox. Combination's your birthday. Everything's inside. Financials, names, scans. If something ever happens, you'll need it. He reached for the pocket watch. This was a gift from the man I betrayed most. You'll see what I mean when you open the files. Click, end of recording. My hands were trembling. It's funny. You think the worst part of betrayal is when someone lies to you. But sometimes, it's when someone loves you enough to protect you from their own truth. I didn't wait. I drove straight to the lake house. Storm rolling in. Dusk creeping over the treetops like spilled ink. Rain started pelting the windshield by the time I pulled into the driveway. The house was cold, dark, quiet. I headed for the basement. Same dusty stairs, same musty air. I moved the wood rack near the furnace, pulled up 3 warped planks, and there it was. A black metal lockbox, heavy, cold. I punched in the code Lily's birthday and it clicked open. Inside, files, old deeds, ledger books, photocopies, and a manila folder with one word on it. Read. I pulled it open. Newspaper clippings. A lawsuit filed in 1974 by someone named Henry Reed. Fraud. Land theft. And my stomach dropped. Unlawful property seizure tied to construction deals in Chittenden County. At the bottom, a note, handwritten in Grandpa's script. He was right. I took what wasn't mine, paid him off to stay quiet, then watched him drink himself into the grave. My heart cracked. I thought I knew the man who raised me. But he carried this guilt in silence for half a century, and now it was mine. I took a shaky breath, because this was the final layer. He didn't just want me to have his legacy. He wanted me to redeem it, to face what he couldn't, and finish what he started. I stood in the basement for a long time, holding the papers, feeling their weight not in ounces, but in responsibility. Then I heard it. A knock upstairs. Sharp, quick, then another. I froze. No one was supposed to be here. I climbed up slowly, papers in hand. When I opened the front door, the rain had stopped. But a figure stood on the porch, hood pulled low, soaked jacket clinging to their frame. It was Peter, eyes wild, voice hoarse. "You need to come with me, now." Why, I asked. He looked over his shoulder. Because someone found out about the audit. And they're not just mad anymore. They're desperate. Peter's eyes darted like a man watching shadows crawl. His soaked hoodie clung to him, breath coming in sharp bursts as thunder cracked somewhere in the distance. The storm had passed, but something darker still hung in the air. "You need to come with me," he said again. "Now." I didn't move, didn't blink, just gripped the folder tighter. "Start talking." He looked behind him, then back at me. Desperate. They know about the audit and the Reed files. I don't know how. They must have had someone inside Grandpa's law firm. But Richard's losing it. Thomas is worse. I narrowed my eyes. "You're telling me this. Why?" Peter shifted his weight, like he couldn't stand the ground under him. Because I didn't sign up for this. I was just growing weed in the garage. Man. Illegal, sure, but I didn't think I was part of a, he swallowed, cover-up that could end in prison. Or worse. The wind picked up again. Cold, biting. Where are we going, I asked. Peter exhaled, relieved I wasn't slamming the door. To the office, Walsh and Sons, tonight. Why? Because they're going to burn it. We didn't waste time. I threw on a jacket. Grabbed Grandpa's pocket watch instinct, not logic in the lockbox. Lily was at my neighbor Jones for the weekend. Thankfully, because what we were about to walk into wasn't family drama anymore. It was a crime scene in progress. Walsh and Sons sat like a fortress on the edge of Burlington's downtown. Tall, gray, cold. The kind of building where you can't tell if anything illegal's happening because everything feels legal. We parked in the alley behind it. Peter killed the engine, heart racing. They're upstairs, executive floor. I glanced at the clock, 11:04 p.m. Too late for staff, too early for janitors. Perfect for secrets. The stairwell smelled like printer toner and old carpet. Each step up. My blood pounded louder in my ears. When we reached the 7th floor, we paused. Faint voices. A door creaked. Then the sharp snap of something heavy falling. I turned to Peter, whispered, "You stay here. Call 911 if I'm not back in 10. He started to protest, but I was already moving. The executive wing was dimly lit. Glass offices, mahogany desks, family portraits trying to look like prestige. Then I saw them. Richard, Thomas, and shockingly Eleanor. All of them in Grandpa's old corner office. Boxes open, papers everywhere. A USB stick being shoved into a laptop. "It's all here," Thomas muttered. "If we wipe the internal backups and torch the physical files, no one can prove anything." Richard grunted, pulling folders out by the fistful and tossing them into a metal bin. Eleanor stood stiff, silent, clutching her purse like a weapon. "We should have done this the night he died," she said coldly. "That bastard always had contingencies." Then she looked up and saw me. "You're too late," she hissed. Thomas spun around, pale. Richard went for his jacket pocket. I raised my voice, not a shout, but a command. "Don't. There are cameras. You know there are. You lay a hand on me. You go down for assault on top of federal obstruction." That froze them, just long enough. I stepped inside, slowly. Lockbox in one hand, watch ticking in my chest pocket. I know about Reed. I know what Grandpa did and what you did after. Richard sneered. "So what? You think you're righteous now? You think exposing our skeletons makes you the hero?" "No," I said. "It makes me free. You're the one still chained to a lie." Eleanor broke then. Not like crying, snapped. "He was supposed to protect us." She spat. "Instead, he handed our empire to a bastard child with calluses." I stiffened. "What did you just say?" She stared. Then Richard, with venom in his voice, said, "He wasn't your real grandfather." The world tilted. Everything blurred the desk. The storm outside. Peter's warning. "What?" "Robert wasn't your blood." Richard said, "Your mother had an affair. He knew. Raised you anyway. That's why he left you everything." Guilt. I staggered back a step. Air gone from the room. But then I understood. That was the final truth Grandpa tried to keep. Not to hurt me, but to protect me from them. He chose me, not by blood, by character. And that made it stronger. Suddenly, alarms blared. Peter had triggered the building security. Flashing red lights lit the hallway. Richard panicked. Thomas cursed. Eleanor reached for the bin of file, but I was faster. I grabbed the bin and kicked it over, scattering pages like broken feathers across the floor. "It's done," I said. "You can't hide it now." Then footsteps thundered from the stairwell. 2 police officers stormed in, followed by a third figure. Mr. Benton, calm, imposing. He looked at me, then at them. I see we've arrived just in time. In the chaos that followed arrests, legal threats, shouting, I stood still, heart like a drum beat. Grandpa's watch ticked against my chest. And in that moment, I knew his legacy wasn't just saved, it was reborn. But there was still one thing left, a decision only I could make. Because now that the truth was out, I sat on the porch of the lake house the next morning. The sun pushing through thin fog like it was trying to decide if the world was worth shining on today. The air was still. Birdsong, wind in the trees, the occasional creak of the old rocking chair, Grandpa's chair beneath me. In my hand was the pocket watch. Not ticking anymore. Stopped at exactly 11:47 p.m. The minute the cops stormed into Walsh & Sons, I turned it over slowly, fingers brushing across the worn brass. The initials etched on the back are W. He wasn't my blood, but damn if he wasn't my father. The aftermath unraveled fast. Richard and Thomas were arrested for obstruction, destruction of corporate records, and pending fraud charges tied to the early 90s land fund. Eleanor, she lawyered up immediately, but couldn't dodge the embezzlement trail linked to 3 nonprofit boards she'd managed over the years. Peter took a deal, testified in exchange for immunity and state rehab. He's still clean. By the way, Walsh & Sons Capital filed for Chapter 11 a week later. By month's end, the empire was crumbling, and all of it was built on a lie Grandpa couldn't outrun. But here's the thing. He didn't ask me to clean up the mess. He asked me to choose. The press wanted blood. Business papers, local networks. One national outlet even tried to offer me a book deal. The bastard who took down the dynasty. Son of the lie. Legacy thief. I said no to all of it. I didn't do this for the headlines. I did this for Lily. For the kids building benches in my shop. For the man who, despite his sins, showed me what it meant to build instead of destroy. So I made a decision. At the next board hearing, I stood before the temporary trustees, suit barely fitting, tie half wrong, voice steady. Dissolve the company. Convert the remaining capital into a non-profit, not a shell, a real foundation. They stared. I continued. Name it after Robert Walsh. Not the banker, the builder. Fund trades programs for youth, veterans. Anyone who's been told they're too broken or too dumb or too blue-collar to matter. Silence. Then Benton, seated in the back, gave a quiet nod. The motion passed. 3 weeks later, we reopened the shop under its new name, Walsh Legacy Hands Foundation. It wasn't flashy, no ribbon-cutting ceremony, no press. Just me, a few volunteers, and a new group of wide-eyed teens unsure how to hold a hammer. One of them, Miguel, age 15, first time touching a saw, looked up and asked, "Mr. Mike, how come you don't work in a real office?" I grinned. Because this is my real office. But I'd be lying if I said it ended there. One night, after class, Lily found me in the basement. I was sorting through Grandpa's old files again, trying to decide what to keep and what to let go. She held up the pocket watch. "You gonna fix this?" I looked at her, then the watch. The ticking had stopped. The spring inside probably shot, but that wasn't the point. "No," I said. "Some things are meant to stay still." She furrowed her brow, confused. Then I took her hand and pressed the watch into her palm. "But you can hold on to it, just in case you ever forget who you come from." "You mean you," she smiled. I shook my head. "No. Better. All of us. Everyone who chose to be something different than what the world told them to be." I watched her run off to the wood shop, ponytail bouncing, laughter echoing across the lake. And for once, I didn't feel like a mistake that survived. I felt like a seed that finally had room to grow. So what's the lesson here? That revenge work? No. That healing works. But only when it's honest. When it starts with burning down the lie and building something real in its place. Story 2. My name is Amanda Thompson. I'm 32 years old. And last Friday, I walked away from a $7 million inheritance. Not because I'm crazy, not because I'm ungrateful, but because I refuse to spend the rest of my life being a character in someone else's legacy fantasy. Let me set the scene: a walnut-paneled boardroom at Thompson & Sons Fine Woodworks, my family's legacy company based in Columbus, Ohio. My father, Howard Thompson, sat at the head of the table, eyes sharp, tie straight. My older brother Mark flanked him, tapping his Mont Blanc pen against a stack of succession documents. My mother, Eleanor, sat in quiet poise, clutching her pearl necklace like it was rosary. They all waited for me to say yes, to sign, to accept my duty. I stood up, and I said no, but to understand why that moment mattered, why it shattered everything you need to know, what it cost me to say no. Because the truth is, I didn't just refuse a company. I refused a lifetime of invisible shackles. I live alone in a modest, sun-drenched apartment on the east side of Columbus. It's not much, but it's mine, rented with freelance money from clients who pay me to design things that breathe, not just sell. I'm a graphic designer and brand strategist. Some weeks I live off black coffee, late nights, and client revisions that feel like personal attacks. But other weeks I get to build entire identities from scratch. Logos, color systems, typography that sings. It's not glamorous, it's not stable, but it's honest. And more importantly, it's mine. Still, in the eyes of my family, I might as well be unemployed. Growing up Thompson meant growing up groomed in the most curated, intentional, suffocating way possible. Our family business has been around for 4 generations. Custom woodwork for upscale homes, luxury hotels, and government buildings. My great-grandfather carved the State House podium. My grandfather installed cabinetry in the White House. No joke. Legacy wasn't just encouraged, it was expected. And I was the only daughter, which, ironically, made me the biggest disappointment. While other little girls were playing with dolls or learning to braid, I was learning to calculate lumber waist ratios and sit through client etiquette classes in patent leather shoes that blistered my heels. Every Sunday after church, instead of cartoons or bike rides, I got economics lectures from my father over burnt waffles. You have a mind for systems. Amanda, he'd say, slicing his eggs like it was a business metaphor. With the right guidance, you'll make this company thrive. I was 10. I'd nod, and I'd swallow the dread. By the time I was 16, I was fluent in corporate small talk and passive-aggressive boardroom dynamics. I could explain the difference between cherry and mahogany blindfolded, but I also had a secret. I loved color. I loved fonts. I loved making something out of nothing, while my classmates doodled hearts and band logos in their notebooks. I sketched rebrands for fictional companies. My AP English teacher once caught me designing a mock campaign for a fake feminist coffee brand called Brew the Patriarchy. She didn't get the joke, but my best friend Lauren did. Lauren is the kind of friend every girl dreams of having, brutally honest, stylish without trying, and the only person who ever said, "Amanda, you don't owe them your life just because you share their blood." I didn't believe her then. Not really. But I wrote it in my leather-bound journal that night. The same one I still write in now. The same one that's sitting beside me as I speak to you. The moment it all began to crack, that would be the infamous family alignment meeting. A casual Sunday morning. I was still in sweatpants, reviewing layouts for a startup client in Chicago. I hadn't even finished my first cup of coffee when my phone buzzed. Group text reminder, Dad's alignment briefing is at 10 a.m. You're expected. Not invited, expected. I remember staring at that text for a long time. My thumb hovered, and instead of typing, on my way, I typed nothing. I got dressed, grabbed my sketchpad, and walked downtown. I didn't know where I was going, but my feet led me to the Columbus Museum of Art, inside. There was an exhibit titled Lineage. Ironically, one section caught my eye, a massive installation of family portraits intentionally vandalized by the artist's black paint slashed through eyes and mouths. On the adjacent wall, a quote in bold Helvetica, "Inherited blood does not equal inherited belief." I just stood there, frozen, shaken, and somehow freed. That night, I sat by my window, journal in hand, looking at the city lights flickering like questions I didn't know how to answer. Lauren had said something days earlier that wouldn't leave me. You treat your dreams like hobbies and their plans like gospel. Why? I didn't have a good answer. But I wrote another entry in my journal. I will not pass this prison on, even if it means burning the bridge behind me. 2 weeks later, I got a call from Mark. Dad wants to move forward with the leadership transition. He said, he wants you to shadow the CFO full-time this quarter. Start Monday. He said it like it was a done deal. Like my life was a puzzle piece on their perfect little legacy board. I took a long breath. And for the first time, I said, I'll think about it. But I didn't mean it. Because in the background, the printer was spitting out my latest client design, a hand-drawn, deeply human logo for a women-led mental health startup. And when I looked at it, I felt proud. Not useful, not acceptable, proud. There's something dangerous about a woman who starts choosing pride over permission. And when I walked into that boardroom last Friday past the polished portraits of my forefathers, past the embroidered quote on the wall, "Build to last," I wasn't there to sign papers. I was there to dismantle a dynasty. They say tradition is sacred. But what if tradition becomes a cage? What if your father's love is conditional on your obedience? What if your mother thinks silence equals support? And what if the only way to breathe is to burn the blueprint? What I didn't know, what none of us knew, was that my quiet little act of rebellion had already been recorded. And someone was going to leak it. The house I grew up in still smells like lemon oil and old ambition. It sits just outside Upper Arlington, Ohio, a 2-story colonial with perfect hedges and American flags on every porch up and down the street. Dad calls it a house that holds its value. But to me, it always felt more like a stage set. Every cushion fluffed, every photo framed, every family dinner performed. Nothing was ever messy in the Thompson household, except the expectations. Sunday dinners were mandatory, even when I lived downtown, even when I had deadlines or migraines or a soul-crushing breakup. Didn't matter. The rules were simple. You showed up, you smiled, and you asked Derek, the golden cousin, how his new boat was doing. Except there's no Derek. Just my brother, Mark. But Derek was the name I gave him in my journal during college. Back when he started perfecting that CEO charm. Always smiling, always agreeable, until he needed to remind you where you fell on the Thompson ladder. Let me paint you a picture of how those dinners went. Roast beef, crystal glasses, Dad at the head of the table with a newspaper folded just so, half reading, half judging, Mom in her apron from Williams-Sonoma, acting like she didn't spend the morning micromanaging caterers, Mark pouring everyone wine from a decanter no one asked for, and me, I was usually trying to make Lily, our rescue mutt, stay off my lap while dodging questions like, "So, still freelancing? Have you thought about joining a real agency? Are you maxing out your Roth IRA?" I once brought a date to one of those dinners, a quiet software engineer named Reese. He wore navy, brought wine, even complimented Mom's asparagus tart. Dad's first question. Didn't figure Amanda for someone who'd date a man who doesn't iron his collar. Reese laughed. I didn't. We broke up a week later. The worst part wasn't the jabs. It was the performance of concern. Mom would lower her voice and say, "Sweetheart, we just want you to be secure. There's no shame in taking the reins of the business. It's your birthright." Birthright. Like I was a medieval baroness being handed the family castle. I think that's when I really started writing things down, not as reflection, but as survival. My leather-bound journal became something more than a diary. It became a log of erasure. April 14th, 2017. Dad tells me my logo for the charity project is too artsy. November 2018. Mark refers to my client roster as side hustle nonsense in front of Aunt Susan. March 9th, 2020. I cancel a trip to California for a branding conference because I'm told I'm needed at a last-minute vendor review for Thompson & Sons. No apology. It wasn't always dramatic. Sometimes it was just a look, a sigh, a door half closed on purpose. But each entry carved out a truth I couldn't ignore anymore. My family didn't want me to thrive. They wanted me to conform. That brings us to the meeting. No, not the boardroom confrontation that comes later. I'm talking about the succession visioning weekend, a.k.a. Dad's Legacy Summit. It was held at the family cabin on Indian Lake. A big rustic property with antler chandeliers and a fireplace the size of a compact car. The kind of place where rich Midwestern men go to feel humble. Dad called it a retreat. It was really an ambush. We arrived Friday night. I brought my laptop and my sketch pad. Mark brought a slide deck titled Scaling the Next Century: Why Family Matters. It was an all-out pitch to cement the transition. He would become president. I would become CFO. Dad would remain as chairman emeritus. Mom would head brand continuity. Whatever that means. There were printed binders, a full buffet, even a videographer. I remember watching that man, a wiry guy named Troy, adjust his camera tripod during dinner. I asked him what it was for. He said, "Your dad wanted some legacy footage, just natural stuff conversations, moments, leadership in action." Natural, my ass. It was that night, after 3 hours of being told how safe my future could be, if I just leaned in, that I excused myself. Went out to the dock and called Lauren. I still remember the cold wood under me, the silence of the lake, the taste of old wine in my mouth. Lauren picked up on the second ring. "What's going on?" I whispered. They made a binder. Pause. Oh God, it has my name on it. Lo, a title, CFO. Did you say yes? No. I smiled. I nodded. I said I'd think about it. But inside I was screaming. Lauren didn't say anything for a moment. Then, "You still have that journal?" "Yeah, well, because maybe it's not just a journal anymore. Maybe it's your Exhibit A." I didn't fully get what she meant yet. But something clicked. That night, I couldn't sleep. I laid in the guest room staring at the ceiling fan, listening to the faint hum of Mark and Dad still talking in the great room. They weren't discussing succession, they were planning my life. I got out of bed, opened my laptop, and started scanning old entries from my journal, typing some of them out, organizing them like evidence. Patterns began to emerge. Deadlines missed, projects buried, awards ignored. Moments where I let them rewrite my future in the name of tradition. Then I thought of something I hadn't remembered in years. When I was 12, I made a logo for our middle school art fair. I was so proud, hand-drawn script, flowers twining around the letters. Dad looked at it once and said, "It's cute, but real business doesn't need flair." I cried in the bathroom for an hour. Then I wrote in my notebook, "Maybe one day flair is business." The next morning, during breakfast, Dad clinked his glass and said, "I'd like to toast Amanda for finally stepping into her role." I hadn't said yes, but that didn't matter. They had already decided, and that's when I realized silence is dangerous, because it gives them permission to name your future without asking you. I raised my glass and smiled, but I made a decision. If they wanted a show, I'd give them one. What I didn't realize, what none of us realized, was that Troy, the videographer, had accidentally recorded something he wasn't supposed to hear, and that file would change everything. 2 days after the lake house retreat, I got a text from an unknown number. "Hey Amanda, this is Troy, the videographer from your family event. There's something you probably want to hear. It wasn't meant to be recorded, but I didn't feel right deleting it." My stomach flipped. I hadn't thought twice about Troy. Quiet guy, flannel shirt, smelled like cedarwood and craft beer. During the retreat, he mostly floated around the edges, filming B-roll of fireplaces, brandy glasses, and Mark pretending to laugh with Dad. I thought he was harmless, but apparently he caught something. I replied with a quick, "Can you send it?" Then I waited. 30 minutes later, an audio file landed in my inbox. It was barely 2 minutes long, but I've never heard anything more revealing in my life. The clip started with the unmistakable clink of ice in a glass. A pause. Then Dad's voice, low but sharp. "She thinks she's got choices, but Amanda's never really been cut out for risk. She folds, always has. We just have to outweight her." Mark chuckled in the background. "She wants freedom. Fine, but when the money dries up, she'll come crawling, and then she'll be easier to manage." Dad again. "Let her play designer. It's a phase. When I'm gone, the board won't follow her anyway. She'll have to accept reality." Mark. "Legacy always wins. She just doesn't know it yet." Click. That was it. I listened to it again, and again, and again. Each time, my jaw clenched tighter, not because it was surprising, but because it wasn't. It was confirmation of every quiet suspicion I'd buried under politeness and guilt. Every time they told me I was being dramatic or too sensitive. This recording said otherwise. They didn't just doubt me. They planned for me to fail. They were counting on it. And in that moment, a quiet flame in my chest turned into something else, something hotter, sharper. Not anger, resolve. I forwarded the file to Lauren without explanation. She called me less than 60 seconds later. "Holy, okay, hell, Amanda!" Her voice was shaking. "I know. This is it. This is your out." I paused. Or, "It's my fuel." That's when Lauren said something I'll never forget. "You don't just walk away from a legacy like that. You redefine it." So I did something bold. I reached out to someone I hadn't spoken to in almost 2 years, Maribel Estrada. Maribel is a powerhouse. She runs a non-profit incubator for women of color in creative industries, graphic designers, animators, writers. She used to be a pediatric surgeon. No. Seriously. She left medicine to become a visual storyteller after her sister died from untreated postpartum depression. She said the system was broken, and stories could fix what science couldn't. I met her at a conference in Austin years ago. She gave a keynote titled, "Legacy is Not a Debt." I remember crying in the hotel bathroom afterward, clutching the free tote bag like it was a life preserver. So when I emailed her subject line, "Family Legacy, Exit Strategy," I didn't expect a response. But she called me that night. Maribel doesn't waste time. She asked for the audio. I sent it. She listened, then said, Amanda, what if we don't just reject their narrative? We publish our own. I blinked. How? And then she said, your journal, your story, your proof. Let's build an exhibit. That word hit different. Exhibit. Not therapy, not vengeance, not social media drama. An exhibit. A curated, deliberate narrative told in my language color. Composition, story. One that used every entry in my journal as a testimony. One that took my silence and turned it into a megaphone. She offered gallery space in her New York collective for a pop-up show. The theme, inheritance versus identity. I'd design it. She'd sponsor it. Lauren would help produce it. And I would finally reclaim the story that had always been written without me. But first, I needed to act like nothing had changed. I attended the next family board meeting. I smiled. I sipped bitter coffee from the Thompson & Sons branded mug like I gave a damn. When Dad handed me a draft of my CFO contract, I took it with steady hands. Let me sleep on it, I said. He nodded. Of course. Take your time, but we're excited. Amanda, this is what you were born to do. Mark smirked. Mom adjusted her brooch. I left that meeting and went straight to my studio, and that's where I started building the wall. It began with a blank canvas, a 6-foot-high vertical board I had propped against the brick wall behind my desk. At the top, I pinned the first journal page I ever wrote about legacy. Then, a photo of my 12-year-old self holding that forgotten art fair logo. Next, a still frame from the audio recording Dad's waveform shape highlighted in red. Then, a screenshot of my bank account balance during my freelance drought in 2020. Pain, humiliation, silence, all mapped, all laid bare. Each piece would become a tile in the mosaic of truth I was building, a visual indictment, a confession booth, but also a declaration. And I kept coming back to that phrase Maribel said. Legacy is not a debt. So I painted it, by hand. Across the center of the board in ink that bled. And as I stepped back, hands stained, floor littered with clippings, I felt something for the first time in years. Power. That night, Lauren stopped by with takeout. She looked at the wall, said nothing for a full minute. Then, damn, this is war. No, I said, this is resurrection. But before I could unveil it all before the gallery show, before the public rupture, I made one last, irreversible move. I sent the audio clip anonymously to the Thompson & Sons executive board. No context, no commentary, just the file. Subject line leadership perspective, unfiltered. Then I waited. The next morning, I got a text from Mark. What the hell did you do? And an email from Dad. No greeting, no sign-off, just 5 words. We need to talk. Now. I didn't reply to Dad's email. I didn't reply to Mark's text either. For once. I wanted them to sit in the silence they'd always demanded from me. Let them wonder. Let them sweat. But I did show up. Tuesday, 8 a.m. Sharp. Back at Thompson & Sons headquarters, mahogany doors, frosted glass conference room, motivational slogans engraved in brass, endure to lead, integrity in every grain. That last one made me scoff as I walked by. Integrity. Huh. Might want to run that through your ethics filter again. Gentlemen, I walked past reception, barely nodding at Sheila, who looked like she was avoiding eye contact on purpose. Smart woman. The door to the conference room was already cracked open. Inside, my father sat at the head of the table, suit jacket off, sleeves rolled. Tie loosened his version of serious mode. Mark leaned against the far wall, arms crossed, jaw tight. I stepped inside and shut the door. Click. Dad didn't waste time. Do you know what you've done? I sat down. Yeah, I sent the truth. You blindsided us. The board is furious. Good, so am I. You made us look like tyrants. You are tyrants. Dad, you built a throne out of expectations and called it love. Mark cut in. Amanda, this affects more than just you. This could tank morale. We have vendor relationships, clients. Let me stop you right there. I leaned forward. Calm, clear. You recorded yourself. Mark, you and Dad. I didn't edit that tape. I didn't twist it. I just shared it. You don't like how you sounded. Maybe don't talk like that behind closed doors. Dad's fist hit the table open palm, but hard enough to rattle the coffee mug beside him. This isn't just about you chasing some design fantasy. This is the family name. No. It's about control. You've tried to script every minute of my life. And now that I've grabbed the pen, suddenly it's a crisis. I could feel my heart pounding under my ribs. But my voice didn't shake. Not anymore. Then came the pivot. We can fix this, Dad said. Tone shifting. We'll put out a statement. Say it was misinterpreted, taken out of context. Mark added, you'll apologize for leaking it. And in return, you'll officially take the CFO position. We'll even give you more creative input into the brand redesign. A public forgiveness arc. Could be good PR. That was the twist. They weren't furious. They were afraid. Not of me, but of losing control of the story. I smiled. Small, measured. You still don't get it. I stood up, reached into my tote and pulled out a large manila envelope. Slid it across the table. Dad hesitated, then opened it. Inside a full-color mock-up of my exhibit wall, a detailed write-up of the installation plan, and a quote from the gallery director confirming the showcase dates. He stared at it like it was a legal threat. In a way, it was. Mark grabbed the sheet. Are you insane? You're turning this into public art? No, I'm turning it into truth. I'm done being the footnote in my own life. You're burning bridges. No, I said, stepping toward the door. I'm building something else. Something you can't control. Dad called after me. You walk away now, Amanda, and you walk away from everything. I paused with my hand on the knob. You think this family is a legacy? But all I see are shackles passed down in walnut boxes. Then I left. I didn't cry in the elevator. Didn't scream in the parking lot. I just sat in my car, stared at the steering wheel, and let the numbness settle into something clean, like clarity. That night, I sat with Lauren on the floor of my studio, surrounded by fabric swatches, broken frames, old sketches. She handed me a beer and raised her brow. Well, I burned it. Good. Then she pointed to the board. Now let's talk strategy. The next few weeks were a blur of movement. Designing the exhibit wasn't just catharsis, it was combat. Every photo I selected, every journal entry I displayed, every color I chose, it all meant something. Red for anger, gray for silence, teal for the version of myself they never let breathe. I created mock logos for each chapter of my life. The daughter draft. A silhouette of a girl shaped like a key. Invisible ink layered handwriting fading beneath pressure. Legacy theft a locked cabinet with no handles. Maribel flew in twice to check progress, each time. She'd walk through the studio in silence, then say just one thing. Make them feel it. And I did. But just as the momentum surged forward, another twist hit. Mom showed up, unannounced, at my apartment. She stood at my door in a camel coat, eyes softer than I expected, lips thin with worry. I let her in. She didn't say anything at first. Just looked around at the chaos of my creative hurricane fabric pinned to lamps. A projector screen of phrases like obedience, love, ink-stained paper everywhere. She finally said, I didn't know you were in pain. I looked at her. You didn't want to know. She sat on the couch, smoothing her skirt. Your father, he thinks he's preserving something sacred. But I think, maybe, he forgot you're sacred too. That landed somewhere deep in me. Then she said, I won't stop him, but I won't stop you either. She stood up, reached into her purse, and handed me a photo me at 5 years old, covered in glitter and paint, smiling like I had the whole world in my hands. You were always like this. I just didn't know how to protect that. And then she left. No hug, no big movie monologue, just truth. Dropped like a pebble in a pond. That photo became the final piece of the exhibit. The last square on the wall. No edits, no filters, just me. Before they wrote over me. Opening night was 2 weeks away, and the RSVPs were rolling in. Gallery staff, press, creatives, and, surprisingly, one board member from Thompson & Sons, privately, anonymously, but still. The story was getting out, not because I screamed, but because I told it on my terms. 3 days before the show, I got another email. No subject line, no signature, just a single sentence. If you go through with this, we'll sue you for defamation. And below that, a PDF attachment titled Cease and Desist, Amanda Thompson. I stared at the email for a long time. The subject line was blank. The message was just one line. If you go through with this, we'll sue you for defamation. Attached a PDF titled Cease and Desist, Amanda Thompson. My name in bold serif font. Lawyer language stacked like bricks. Reckless dissemination of internal conversations. Potential damage to family-owned business interests. Irreparable harm to corporate reputation. But what hit me hardest wasn't the legal threats. It was the signature at the bottom. Mark Thompson, Executive Vice President. Not Dad. Mark. That wasn't just a legal maneuver, it was personal. He wanted me to see his name, to know he was the one drawing the line in the sand. I forwarded the email to Maribel. Within 5 minutes, my phone lit up. Don't panic, she said, voice calm but firm. This is classic. Empty saber rattling. They're trying to scare you before the exhibit goes public. What if they actually file something? Then we fight. But Amanda, truth isn't defamation. And you have the journal, the tape, the timeline. They've already lost the moral argument. Now they're just trying to silence the evidence. I exhaled slowly. My fingers were trembling, but my spine held steady. Maribel continued. Look, if this were about money, they would have handled it through back channels. This is about control, and control thrives on fear. Then I guess they picked the wrong woman, I said. The next morning, I walked into the gallery with a giant tub of spackling paste and a gallon of matte black paint. Lauren met me at the front, with her hair tied back in a red scarf, paintbrush already in hand. You ready to break the internet? She asked. More like break the bloodline, I replied. We worked side by side for 12 hours straight. No music, no breaks, just paint, sweat, and intention. We reassembled the panels, hung the photos, tested the projector for the short film. Maribel's team helped us cut 2 minutes of time-lapse journal entries, fading into phrases like, obedience is not loyalty. Legacy can be rewritten. I am not your investment. At the entrance, I installed the centerpiece, a glass box holding my original childhood sketch. The art fair logo that Dad once called cute but unserious. Below it, a brass plaque read, the dream they tried to delete. Word of the installation was spreading. Local press picked it up. First, Columbus Creatives, the Ohio Independent. Even a podcast called Brand Heretics. The day before opening, I got a DM from a former Thompson & Sons intern. I worked there 2 summers ago. I saw how they talked about you. I'm so glad you're doing this. Then another from an ex-employee in accounting. I got fired for pushing back on how they handled maternity leave. Never got to say my piece. Thank you for saying yours. The tide was turning, not into a storm, into something sharper, a reckoning. But then came the twist I didn't see coming. Late that night, Maribel forwarded me an anonymous message sent to the gallery's press inbox. The subject line, Urgent Family Secrets. Attached a 17-second video clip, grainy, shaky, but unmistakable. It was a recording taken at a private vendor meeting last year. Dad and Mark, joking, laughing. And then Dad says, "Amanda's just our insurance policy. Looks good on paper, keeps the feminists happy." My breath caught in my throat. Lauren was behind me, watching over my shoulder. She whispered, "Do you know who sent that?" "No," I said, but whoever it was just handed me the match. We debated for hours. Should we include the video in the exhibit? Was it too risky, too raw? But in the end, the answer was simple. I was tired of shielding them from their own reflections. So we added a small digital kiosk in the far corner of the gallery. No fanfare, no title, just a simple button on a touchscreen. Play. Let the audience decide. Opening night. The gallery buzzed before the doors even opened. Photographers, journalists, design students, local activists, and a surprising number of well-dressed strangers I assumed were board members or corporate spies let them watch. Maribel gave a short speech. Lauren passed out zines, and me. I stood by the entrance, spine straight, palm steady. When the doors opened, the room flooded with people. But no one came to greet me with condescension. No one asked why I wasn't back at the company. They just looked, felt, sat in it. A woman in her 60s stood silently in front of the wall of journal entries for 15 minutes. Then she turned to me and whispered, "You told my story without ever meeting me." That's when I realized this wasn't about revenge. It was about release. Halfway through the evening, Mark showed up. Alone, no entourage, no dad. He walked straight to the center installation, stared at the plaque beneath the sketch, then slowly turned to face me. His eyes didn't hold anger. They held something else. Confusion, maybe even fear. He took a step closer. "I didn't think you'd actually do it," he said. "You never did," I replied. "That's the point." He nodded. Then, "You just burned the last bridge, right?" I looked around at the crowd, at the art, at the woman crying by the wall of words. "No," I said. "I built my own." The last guest left around midnight. I stayed behind to lock up. And for the first time in years, I didn't feel like I owed anyone an explanation. But as I turned off the lights, my phone buzzed with a number I didn't recognize. I answered. A woman's voice, calm, warm. "Is this Amanda Thompson?" "Yes." "My name's Gloria Patel. I'm with River and Rise Publishing. I saw your exhibit tonight. We'd like to talk about turning it into a memoir." And just like that, the legacy I was never allowed to inherit was about to become the story I owned. I sat on my fire escape with a cup of coffee that had gone cold 20 minutes ago. Below me, the street hummed with early morning buses and dog walkers. The city felt indifferent. And for once, that indifference comforted me. Because after everything, after the exhibit, the threats, the press, the tears I had won, quiet. Irrefutable truth, I was free. That freedom didn't come in a grand speech or some courtroom victory. It came when I realized no one could make me choose between silence and survival anymore. But of course, nothing ends quietly with the Thompsons. The day after the gallery closed, my email exploded. Some were love letters from strangers. "Thank you for being loud so I could be honest." I cried at the invisible ink wall. My dad erased me too. Some were invitations podcasts, college panels, an offer from a startup in Portland to lead a design team focused on storytelling and social justice. And some were nuclear. That morning, Lauren burst into my apartment with a copy of the Columbus Herald in hand. The headline took up half the page. Thompson and Sons faces. Internal shakeup following leaked exhibit. Below that, in bold, anonymous board member confirms investigation into top leadership's ethics and handling of gender discrimination claims. I blinked. Wait, what? Lauren flopped onto my couch and held up her phone. It's blowing up on Twitter. Apparently someone on the board didn't just watch your exhibit, they reported it. Quietly, internally. And it opened a whole Pandora's box. That someone, I later found out, was Diane Lee, a senior partner on the board, and one of the few women to ever make it that high in the company. She didn't say anything publicly. She didn't need to, because by then, the video from the exhibit, the one with Dad's feminist's happy remark, had leaked online. Not by me, not by Maribel, but by someone who filmed it at the exhibit. By Tuesday morning, the hashtag Legacy's Not a Leash was trending, and for the first time in my life, their reputation, not mine, was what needed damage control. Then came the call. Dad. I let it ring the first time, and the second. By the third, I picked up. His voice was quieter than I remembered, measured, stripped of its usual authority. Amanda, I saw the video, and the exhibit. Silence. It's powerful. I didn't respond. You've made your point. The press is brutal. Your mother, she's not sleeping. Dad, I interrupted. Why are you calling? More silence. I want to meet. Not as an executive, just as your father. That word felt so thin coming from him, like tissue paper over a bullet hole. I hesitated, and then I said 1 hour, at the sculpture park, daylight, public. He showed up on time. Dark gray coat, no tie, older than I remembered. Suddenly, we sat on opposite benches, a modern sculpture between us that looked like a bird trying to fly with one wing. He cleared his throat. You humiliated me. I told the truth. He nodded, slowly. You always were too smart for your own good. I got that from you, I said, a little sharper than I intended. Then he did something unexpected. He reached into his coat pocket and pulled out my childhood sketch, the one from the logo contest. The original. I kept it. He said, I lied when I said I tossed it. I stared. The paper was worn at the edges, folded but intact. He laid it on the bench between us. I didn't know how to love you without shaping you. That's not an excuse. It's just what I was taught. I looked at the sketch, then at him. Control isn't love. He nodded again. I see that now. Then he stood. You've built something real, and I'm sorry it took destroying everything for me to see it. He walked away, leaving the drawing behind. I didn't cry, but something inside me did shift, like a heavy curtain being pulled open for the first time in years. Back at the studio, I pinned the drawing beside the glass box replica from the exhibit. 2 versions of the same truth, one stolen, one reclaimed. Maribel called that night. Congratulations, she said. River and Rise wants to move forward with the book. I blinked. Wait, they're serious. Dead serious. Memoir/creative manifesto. Working title Inheritance Isn't Ownership. I laughed, then paused. What if I'm not ready? You weren't ready for any of this, she replied. And yet, look where you are. Fair point. But just when I thought the storm had passed, another wave hit. A former Thompson and Sons employee, someone I'd never met, filed a class action lawsuit. Gender-based discrimination, unequal pay, retaliation. And guess what? My exhibit was listed in the complaint as cultural evidence. My story wasn't just mine anymore. It had cracked open something bigger. I sat with that for a long time. It's one thing to tell your truth. It's another to realize your truth might help dismantle a machine. The guilt crept in, as it always did. Was I responsible for the layoffs that would follow, for the damage? For the brand crumbling? Lauren answered that with a single sentence. You didn't break them. Amanda, they built it wrong. In the weeks that followed, I got letters, real ones, stamped, handwritten. One from a 19-year-old art student in Montana who said my story kept her from dropping out. One from a mother in Georgia who showed the exhibit video to her teenage daughter and said, you don't have to be nice to be accepted. One from Diane Lee, typed, 2 pages, ending with, if you ever decide to build your own studio, I'd be honored to invest. And so I did. I filed for a new LLC, Thompson & Free. Not a company, a collective. Designers, writers, creators, people who'd been told no by people in suits. Our mission stories with backbone. And every time I look at the logo on our front door, an open cage with light streaming out, I remember the girl who once drew a swirl of color in a world of gray. Then, one quiet evening, I got a voicemail from an unknown number. A man's voice, careful, hesitant. Hi, this is Daniel. I worked for your grandfather. I think you should know. There's something in the old family trust. Something they didn't tell you. I listened to the voicemail twice, then a third time. Daniel. The name echoed like something out of a family myth. My grandfather's name, Jonathan Thompson, carried weight in our lineage like a ghost no one dared mention in full. He died when I was still in high school, and I barely remembered his voice. But I remembered the way Dad spoke about him, reverent, almost afraid. And now this man, Daniel, claimed to have worked for him. There's something in the old family trust. Something they didn't tell you. I called the number back. He answered like he was expecting it. He sounded old, calm, like someone who'd carried secrets long enough to know they rot from the inside out. We met at a quiet cafe on the outskirts of town. Daniel wore a tweed coat, the kind with elbow patches, and carried a thick, leather-bound folder that looked older than I was. After the usual pleasantries, coffee, scones, a brief rundown of how he'd once been my grandfather's personal assistant, we got to the point. He placed the folder in front of me and opened it slowly. Inside were photocopies, legal filings, original will pages, letters with my grandfather's sharp, slanted handwriting. And then he said it, before Jonathan passed. He wrote a codicil, an amendment to his trust, one that was never executed because your father intervened. I blinked. What do you mean? Daniel leaned in. Your grandfather left something for you. Not just money. A message. A blueprint. He wanted you to build something separate. An art foundation. A public studio space. For people like him, like you. I sat back, stunned. My heart thudded so loud I could hear it in my ears. He knew about me, I whispered. He saw your sketches. He knew you had fire. And he wanted that fire protected, not tamed. The codicil had been quietly removed during the estate execution, not destroyed, but misplaced, legally gray, morally black. Daniel had kept a copy. Maybe out of guilt, maybe out of love. Either way. He handed it to me and said, it's yours, if you still want it. But taking it means challenging the will, which means more war. I stared at the final page, my name, in my grandfather's handwriting. Amanda Grace Thompson, to be held in trust for the pursuit of her own truth. Later that night, I sat on my bedroom floor, the folder open beside me, and cried harder than I had in years. Not out of sadness, but because for the first time in my entire life, someone from before had believed in me, and they had tried to bury that, just like they tried to bury everything else. I didn't go public with it, not right away. Instead, I brought the papers to Maribel and her legal team. She read them in silence, then looked up and said, "You know what this is, right?" "Proof." She nodded. "It's the origin story of the thing they tried to erase. The missing beginning." 3 weeks later, we announced the creation of the JGT Creative Trust, funded in part by a recovered clause of the original Thompson estate. The press exploded. Thompson legacy challenged from the grave, granddaughter. Uncovers lost vision when art becomes bloodline. But this time, it wasn't scandal. It was revelation. Lauren painted a mural on the side of our new building downtown, a phoenix made of torn paper. Flying above the words, "We don't inherit silence." My dad never called again, but my mom sent flowers. Sunflowers. With a note. He would have been proud. I'm sorry we weren't. And that was enough. Not absolution, but acknowledgement. And that matters more than people think. I sat down with River and Rise a month later to begin outlining the memoir. It wasn't easy. There were parts I didn't want to write, moments I'd rather skip. But then I remembered the woman in the gallery, the one who whispered, "You told my story without ever meeting me." And I knew I had to finish it. For her. For me. For anyone who ever got told, "Be quiet. Be grateful. Don't embarrass us." The memoir was titled Unbranded. The first line, "I was born into a story that wasn't mine." So I wrote a new one. In the year that followed, I watched the world change in tiny, beautiful ways. Former employees from Thompson & Sons started their own ventures. Diane Lee joined the advisory board of the JGT Trust. Art schools began using my exhibit as a case study in narrative design. And my inbox filled with photos of murals, poems, installations by people who called themselves inheritance breakers. But here's the part that stayed with me most. One day, a package arrived at the studio, no return address. Inside was a wooden box. Hand-carved, smooth, familiar. Inside that box, my grandfather's fountain pen. Still stained with blue ink, still heavy with meaning. No note, no explanation, just the past. Returned, but no longer weaponized. I placed it next to the sketch in the studio's main hallway. A final symbol. Not of the legacy I was forced into, but the one I chose to reclaim. So what did I learn? That sometimes justice looks nothing like revenge. It looks like survival. It sounds like your own voice stronger than you remember. It feels like a door closing without fear that another one will open. And most of all, that legacy isn't what they leave you. It's what you do with what they tried to keep from you. And if you're watching this, wondering whether your story matters, whether you can step out of the version someone else wrote for you, let me say it plain. You already are. The moment you question the script, you start writing your own. Oh, and that anonymous tip about the trust. We traced the email. Guess who sent it? Mark. Yeah. Even in the end, he couldn't inherit the throne, so he passed me the key. Not because he forgave me, but because some part of him finally understood. Freedom isn't a betrayal. It's the only honest legacy left.